Hi, my name is Andrea Clark. I'm a retired licensed family therapist, and I am your host of The Truth About Mental Health What They Don't Tell You. And today is going to be a solo episode where I very openly and vulnerably share my story, share my testimony, being put through the mental health system, working in the mental health system, and to be totally honest, I have been putting off recording this first episode because I kept thinking about what parts would be helpful and relevant to others. What parts are going to be the most impactful? How vulnerable do I want to get? How real? How honest? How much detail do I want to go into? And today I decided it was the day. And I'm like, screw it. I'm going for it. And I'm going to tell all. And the whole mission behind what I'm doing here at The Truth About Mental Health is to really provide people who are searching. Maybe they already know that going mainstream first and Western medicine first is not the answer, but they don't fully know what the answer is. Maybe you have an inkling. Maybe you have a hunch that Western medicine, mainstream mental health practices are not the right thing. Maybe you've been through it like I have and you've realized it doesn't work, but you don't know what does. And maybe you are so seasoned in this arena where you've been on the holistic health, the alternative solution journey for a long time, and you just want to find a place where you can hear inspiring stories, you can hear expert interviews, a place where you can find your people, because it can be very lonely to be a person in the world that's so dominated by a certain narrative, to have the beliefs that you have and not have your own tribe, not have your own group of people to rub shoulders with and lock arms with. And so that is my hope and my wish and my prayer, to provide that space here for really anybody at whatever stage of this journey they are on, a place to gather information, to hear inspiring stories of healing, to feel hopeful, to have education, to have access to real resources that are going to help you get to the root of your mental health, help you help your children have amazing mental wellness and mental health, and help your community. So that's what we're doing here. And today I wanted to start with my story. So again, I am a retired licensed family therapist. And the reason why I make that very clear is because I'm not licensed anymore. I've been licensed in 2 states. I have tons of certifications. I used to have a 6-month wait list. I did very well in my years as a therapist. But the things that I want to share and the things that I want to go after in our mental health system and with Big Pharma could get me in a lot of trouble with the licensing board. And I forfeited my license on purpose so that I could speak as freely as I wanted to. And that's why I don't have a license. I still educate myself. I still advance my knowledge in the field of psychology. I don't practice anymore. And so I wanted to give that full disclosure. I do have some other certifications. I'm certified in DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, if you've ever heard of that. I used to work with super high risk teenage girls, suicidality, suicide ideation, self-harm, severe mood disruptions. And I also have a certification as a mental wellness coach, and I have extensive education and experience in functional medicine for mental health. And my degree is a master's of psychology, master's of education in psychology with a concentration or a specialty in marriage and family therapy. So that is my education. I graduated with 2 bachelors in psychology and Spanish. But what makes me probably the biggest expert in this arena is my own personal testimony. and the testimonies in which I witnessed for the 13 years that I practiced in the therapy room. People's stories, my story, people's stories. Those are the most powerful testimonies. That's what makes me tick. That's what makes me want to share all of this information, because there's so many more people out there who um, don't know it, and don't know where to find it. So let's go back to my upbringing. I was raised in a really stressful home. My mother got pregnant with me when she was 19. My father was, I think, like maybe 22 or 23. And they were young, they were inexperienced, they were broke, and they just decided, like, hey, we're going to make this work. They didn't really know each other very well. Hey, we're going to make this work. And they got married and they had me. And I had a series of very traumatic things happen to me over the course of my upbringing. Um, some of which was from my parents. I look back now, and outside of one of the things that happened to me, um, my parents were very ill equipped. So it wasn't, my mom wasn't trying to harm me. She wasn't trying to neglect me. She was young. She was ill equipped. She was dealing with her own trauma from my father. Um, I look back and I'm like, she was very dissociated and detached most of the time, just going through the motions. She had poor judgment and she had insecurities. And so as I share these stories, I just, I really want to protect my family. I know that even among the abuse, like my parents did the best they could with what they had. It doesn't mean the best was acceptable. It doesn't mean the best was what I deserved or my siblings. It doesn't mean that it was okay, but I have found peace in my heart about it, and I share it for testimony and educational purposes. So, I experienced a lot of trauma. I was the oldest. My parents were very negligent, didn't pay attention. I had to protect my siblings very frequently. I have a memory of catching my little toddler brother drinking a whole bottle of Triamenic, and knowing as the older sibling that, and I was little, I mean, I was maybe in first grade, that he could die. I don't even know how I knew that, but I knew it, and I had to tell my mom, and I had to hold the towel for him as we ran to the emergency, like drove to the emergency room. My sister almost drowned in a lake. I found her. Like, I'm the person who realized she was missing. So all of us were in the boat, and I looked around and I was like, where's my sister? This one still makes me emotional. And I looked over the side and she was hanging on. Her eyes were rolled back in her head. The water was just covering her face. Like, I don't know how long she was like that. And thank God she was hanging on. And I had to save both of my siblings' lives in my lifetime. So that just gives you an idea of, and those weren't flukes. These were like, this was kind of normal. And it was always chaotic. And it was all like no adult was paying attention. And it was always stressful. And I was a little girl who grew up with anxiety. I had sleep issues off and on throughout my childhood, just like struggling to fall asleep. That seemed to get under control after my parents' divorce. And a big piece of that was my anxiety surrounding my father. He was a very unstable man. He was an alcoholic. Um, and he was unkind and abusive and erratic. And once my parents got divorced, I felt a certain amount of peace, okay? Relief, a sense of relief. I felt more safe in my home. And by then I was older, I was 10 and 11. And so I was really elevated to this like parentified role. I had always been parentified, but then now I'm like, I'm doing life with my mom and I'm helping take care of my siblings. But something in that, as unhealthy as it was, felt safer. Okay. So fast forward a couple of years, and my mom dates a series of men who are as equally as horrible as my father, just in different ways. But for the most part, it was like, okay, there were incidents that happened, but they didn't live with us. And so I was kind of unbothered, if you will. Like, I got to go to school, I got to be with my siblings. Things were pretty okay. And then my mom got remarried, and she got remarried to somebody who really was not interested in being a father, a stepfather, didn't like children. I mean, I honestly have no idea what my mom was thinking. This is where the grace comes in. And we didn't know him very well. We had met him 2 times before my mom married him and he moved in. I mean, it was kind of insane, you guys. And as you're listening to my story, I just want to say something. Many people will say, well, I don't have trauma. I wasn't hit. I wasn't abandoned. I wasn't neglected. I wasn't raped. I wasn't this. I wasn't that. Right? Trauma is anything that leaves some sort of imprint or impact on you. Something that has a profound effect on you, something that imprints in your nervous system and your subconscious. So what's traumatic to one person might not be traumatic to another. It's not the act or the action that happened against you. It's how you internalize it and how you experience it. So, for example, my daughter has primarily lived a very trauma-free life. Okay. I've yelled at her a couple of times. Um, she experienced divorce, and that's really the extent of her trauma. But these things have felt traumatic for her. Also, she got a really short haircut when she was a little girl because she didn't like having long hair. And when she went to kindergarten, there was a boy who would tell her she's a boy. And she doesn't feel like a boy, she feels like a girl. And that really traumatized her. And even recently, so that was like when she was 5, and just a couple months ago, so 5 years later, she brought that up when we were working with our body code practitioner. That felt traumatizing to her. She internalized that. So, any of you listening in, any of you watching, I want you to understand that you don't have to have something that you consider catastrophic to happen for you to have trauma, to have fears, to have anxiety. That is not how it works. Anything that you experience and that leaves an impression on you, that can be trauma. Okay. So I really want to debunk this misconception of trauma because I do feel like it has been used in a way in mainstream mental health, there's just such a misconception around trauma. Now, I did experience a lot of trauma in my upbringing, but there's many people who did not. And it's subtle little nuanced things that are trauma, but they wouldn't consider it trauma, that they are significantly affected by. So I really want you to think about that. And this whole thing with my mom remarrying this man was significant for me because an incident happened where he hit my brother and sister, and I called my mom, and I called her at work, and I'm like, he can't do that. Like, this is not okay. If he ever does this again, I'm going to call the police. Okay. So she gets home from work and they have a talk. She tells him what I say. They call me into the room, and he says to me, and very firm, very like intimidating, he's like, if you what I did was wrong, but if you ever threaten to call the police again, I will walk out that door and I will never come back. Well, of course, I'm thinking, hell yeah, like, good, I want you to walk out the back. Like, I don't want you here. It was interesting though, because I looked over to my mother for like support, and she gave me these pleading eyes, like, please just don't mess this up. And I knew, like, I had this heart sink moment where I was like, okay, I am definitely on my own. My siblings are we are on our own. He runs the show. Like, I could fight, and I did, but I could fight, but I am outnumbered, and I'm overpowered in this situation. And I really just resigned to that, and I felt a sense of hopelessness and a little bit of sadness, and I definitely started to detach from my family. Not my siblings so much, but like, I didn't want to be a part of family outing. Like, I hung out in my room. I avoided at all costs. um and at the same time that I did that, from a protective space, I also yearned for my mom to care, to give me attention, to acknowledge my experience. And it got to a point where just so much was going on with my stepdad, not even towards me, but how he was with my siblings, that and I would frequently stand up for them. And I just didn't want to be around him. And so I wasn't necessarily the most pleasant person. I on purpose, like I look back now, on purpose, I made it where like I would just sit at the dinner table with like kind of this stink face and just like energy. And eventually I didn't have to come to dinner anymore and I would eat dinner in my bedroom. Whether that was the right thing for my parents to do, I don't know. But one day I remember my mom took me to a therapist and I didn't understand why. And I sat in front of this therapist, you guys. I was like probably 13 at the time, maybe 14. And I felt so defensive because it made me like my mom made me feel like there's something wrong with me. And she didn't say those words, but to be put in front of a therapist when my home is the way it is, I'm like, oh my gosh, they're literally treating me like there's something wrong with me. And I was so mad. I was so mad. And I'm sharing this because a lot of times parents bring their children to therapists because they don't know what to do. And I know that that's why my mom did it, but she didn't have a talk with me. She didn't position it in a way that didn't make me feel like alienated or shame or whatever. Luckily, I was a kid that had a pretty strong discernment, and I had a conversation with myself where I'm like, no, I shouldn't be in therapy. My parents should be in therapy. Like, why am I in therapy? They're the ones who are doing the things, right? And so thankfully I felt, but I still felt really rejected because it was kind of like, here, just like you need to get fixed. And so I always caution parents, and I used to do this in my practice, like I never, ever allowed parents to bring their child on the first appointment. If their appointment was for their child, I always had them come by themselves because I never wanted children to feel weird. I never wanted children to hear themselves being talked about. I never wanted it to feel like they were the problem. And so then I would educate the parent about this, right? And I would educate the parent on how to talk with their child before they bring them in and how they're going to introduce me and how we're going to position this because we don't ever want their child to feel like there's something wrong with them. And sidebar, pretty much, I would say 90% of the time, any child and even teen came in my office, it ended up being where I was working with the parents anyway, primarily, because at the end of the day, even with teens, they're responding to their environment. And if the core people in their life can't make shifts to create an environment that's going to help them heal and thrive, it's going to be an uphill battle. And so I ended up working with parents all the time anyway. And I remember because my mom told me to take the bus home. So literally after my very first therapy experience, which was horrible, I she booked me with some and therapy's come so far, so I'm so thankful. Like there's way more hip therapists and more relatable therapists for teens and kids and young couples and women and people of color and marginalized groups, and I'm so grateful for that. But at that time, right, like this, I was 13. I'm 42, so this is a long time ago. This man was wearing a full-on suit. He was like a middle-aged old guy and he had a clipboard that he would like hold up. He wouldn't even look me in the eyes when I was talking. I felt so humiliated. I felt like it was just the work. I couldn't even believe the experience that I had. And I remember leaving that office thinking, what? I'm going to become a therapist one day so that I can tell parents how their kids really feel so that they stop acting the way that they're acting. Like that was literally what ran through my mind as a 13-year-old. I was pissed. And I had to take the bus home. It was like probably a 45-minute hour endeavor. And I just sat there seething. I was just so mad. And things kind of got worse from there. But I'll be honest with you guys, like I don't really know how. Really think my stepdad pushed it a lot. Um, I did dabble a little bit in some substances, but it wasn't heavily at that point. I really kept to myself. And one day my mom took me to a psychiatrist and I didn't understand why. I did not understand why I was being taken to a psychiatrist because for the most part, like I got straight A's, I came home on time, I did my chore, like there wasn't it was like they just didn't like my attitude, I think in certain ways. Obviously, I'm not them, I don't know, but I was perplexed, like, why am I being now taken to a psychiatrist? So we had literally all of a 15, 20-minute appointment. No joke. And pretty much my mom does all the talking. I think he asked me maybe a couple of questions, but I sat there mad with my arms crossed. Like I didn't want to talk. There was no established trust. Again, another older man, totally unrelatable, no established trust. And I'm like sitting there thinking, like, are you kidding me? I have to go on medication. Like there's nothing wrong with me. Like you guys are just a-holes. Like literally, this is what I'm thinking. And he decides to diagnose me with bipolar disorder. You guys, there is no way that I had bipolar disorder. If anything, I had complex trauma, right? And I had an adjustment disorder to my circumstances. Okay. And because I didn't have high highs and low lows. And back then, that was like the only kind of bipolar disorder there was in the DSM. Now there's like 50 million kinds. I'll do a episode on the DSM. I will rip that apart too. So, um, he diagnoses me in front of me with bipolar disorder. I remember, I remember just like him saying that label, and it just made me feel I was really fighting it and I was like, no way. But I remember just feeling like, why am I being labeled? Why am I being told that I'm a kind of way? Like, none of these people understand. Like, I'm not. Like, I just am frustrated with my family life. Like, my mom's oblivious. My stepdad's abusive. Like, my dad's off being an alcoholic. Like, why am I the one getting a label and getting a pill and all this stuff? Like, I remember thinking this, and this is so many young people's experience because their parents, even if they're well-meaning, they are oblivious to how they contribute to their children's mental health. And I took it. I probably could have fought it, but at that point, I was starting to be slowly beat down, you guys. Like my little feisty spirit was just starting to slowly feel beat down. So I took it, and it was Paxil. And at the time, you guys, there were no black box warnings on medication. And there was a study around that same time that was suppressed talking about how Paxil can cause severe suicide ideation, suicidal thoughts, and even potential suicidal behaviors in adolescents. And so I was put on Paxil. I had never had a suicidal thought previous to this, you guys. I was definitely angsty. I was a little bit moody. And I definitely felt like sad. I had melancholy for sure. Like for sure. And I did dabble in some substances a little bit at that point. So that might have also been something that they observed maybe like on the weekends. I also was sleeping all the time. I would be up really late on the phone with my friends up until like 2 in the morning. Then I'd go to school at 6. I was a high performer in school, but I would sleep on the weekends. You know what I mean? To like catch up. And maybe for them, they didn't know that that's like teen behavior and whatever it is, right? So the Paxil took a huge toll on me. When I started Paxil, I was like 115 pounds or something, 110 pounds. I gained probably 20 pounds, maybe more, maybe 25 over the course of like a year. I went from this very petite, confident in my appearance young lady to very overweight. I went from like a size 2 or 4 to a size 12. That massively affected my mental health, my self-confidence, my sense of self. It happened very quickly. I got stretch marks. I mean, it was horrible. And I started having thoughts of suicide. I started having really dark thoughts. And I started feeling this crazy sense of hopelessness um, that I'd never felt before. And just feeling dark and heavy all the time. And my sleep started to become actually really disturbed. So yes, sometimes I'd stay up late talking on the phone with my friends, but then I started like, I couldn't fall asleep. My anxiety actually went up when I started taking Paxil. I would say before that I had a typical adolescent anxiety, nothing clinical. And after Paxil, I was having racing thoughts. I was struggling to fall asleep because of my racing thoughts. My nervous system was actually more dysregulated. I was like antsy. And I could not sleep. So they put me on Ambien. Now we know Ambien can be very dangerous. And people have night terrors on Ambien, people sleepwalk on Ambien. Um, and so I started taking Ambien, and Ambien just made me feel high. It didn't necessarily help me sleep because what was happening was like this cascade effect of side effects now, right? My eyes were glazed over between the Paxil and the Ambien. I wasn't sleeping at all at night. I would sleep, but it was like not really sleep, you guys. I felt drugged up in the morning. I was having to drink coffee as a teenager to even kind of wake up. And I would literally sleep all through first period in my history class. Now, we're talking about a straight A student who was awake, who was astute, who thrived in an academic setting, now sleeping through her first period and sometimes part of my second period, part of my third period. Like I just would sleep half the school day. Okay. My grades, thank God, didn't slip. I just was too much of like, for some reason, I was just too much of an achiever. Grades were important to me. So I would make it work. I would do the extra work in the evenings. I would do it on the weekends, that kind of thing. And things seemed to be escalating in my family dynamics. I think I was becoming more unbearable to be around with the hopelessness and the anxiousness. And I just felt resentment towards my parents for me having to be on this medication and how it was affecting me. And I didn't feel good about myself because I was overweight. And the dark thoughts just kept getting stronger and stronger. And had my first attempted suicide. I actually cut my wrists, which cutting self-harm was never on my radar either, you guys. And I actually cut my wrists. And I ended up my mom took me to the hospital and I ended up going, and I think I took, honestly, it's a blur. So I think I might have taken some Ambien. I don't know. That might have been the next time. And I was put inpatient for a week. And I've actually never told people about my experience going inpatient. I haven't really ever told anybody that I went inpatient. And I was put inpatient for a week, and I will tell you that anything that like mainstream insurance pays for, unless it's like, because there's always one-offs, you guys. There's always like a couple of places that take mainstream insurance and like are great, but most of these facilities, you guys, it's bare minimum and there's no actual real therapeutic intervention. They literally get you stabilized so that they can send you back into the environment that got you there in the first place. I am really not for this type of intervention unless absolutely necessary. So essentially, I spent a week there. They adjusted my meds. So like what they do is they med you up like major. They try to do group therapy. Okay, well, group therapy for a teen, not going to happen. So literally all we did was sit around like staring at each other. They feed you shit food for a week because it's like hospital type food. So it's like not healthy. It's like tons of carbs, tons of sugar, inflaming your brain. And they medicate you to sleep. And then when they deem you stable, they send you home. And there's like they might make recommendations for you to update with your psychiatrist or to get this kind of therapy, but there's not, you guys, like, this is what it looks like. Okay. So not long after that, and I don't even know how soon, this part's kind of a blur, the timeline. And this is not something that I can really talk to my mom about. It's very much a sore subject for her. So I don't know what happened, but something prompted me, and I took like a whole bottle of Ambien. I took a bunch of Tylenol. I mean, I had to be taken out in a stretcher. And I remember blacking out from it, and waking back up in the same hospital. And I remember the first time I went to the hospital, I was just like terrified at first. I'm like, was terrified at being there, being not in my home, being in a strange place. It was scary. And this makes sense why they have to medicate kids and teens when they go inpatient. Like that's terrifying. That in itself is a traumatizing thing. The second time I was like, man, like I just kind of feel abandoned like by my family. Like this I am crying out for help. I'm crying out for somebody to acknowledge I'm in pain, and but this is how you're acknowledging it, right? It's like I just wanted at that point my mom to say, I see you. I see you. And that never happened. And so a combination of my family circumstances and these significant side effects from the medication led me to these two attempted suicides. And my mom and stepdad decided to kick me out of the house after I got back and ship me off to stay with my dad, who is an incredibly unstable person. And I dealt with that for a period. It was horrible. And so once I turned 18, I begged my mom to co-sign on an apartment. And I got my act together and finished school and went to college. And I went to college and I decided to take myself off my medication cold turkey. I didn't like how it was making me feel. I slept all the time, you guys. Like I slept all the time. Like this medication made me depressed. It made me dopamine. Like I don't know. Like this is my experience. Knowing what I know now is that it felt like I was dopamine deficient. I would go to class, come back, sleep. I was sleeping all the time, you guys, and I was gaining so much weight. And one day, something inside me was just like, what? You're going to take yourself off. And I took myself off cold turkey, which is pretty insane. I was young and dumb and really didn't understand the repercussions, but I took myself off cold turkey. It was one of the hardest years in my entire life, going to college, being new in college, not knowing anybody, taking myself off medication, detoxing with a roommate, but I did it. And I started going to therapy on campus, and I had the most profound experience with this amazing therapist who just made me feel so seen and who listened to me and who asked me these insightful questions. And she changed my life. And I started to feel like I can live life on my own terms. I can heal. I can figure this out. Like, I think I can figure this out. I think I'm going to be okay. And that was really the start of my healing journey. And I was 18. And there's been many twists and turns and all sorts of things that have happened along the way that were not always healthy. And I had to learn how to be more emotionally regulated. And I had to learn how to deal with conflict better and all sorts of things. But I've been doing it holistically and alternatively ever since I took myself off off that medication. And fast forward to becoming a therapist, very high achieving person, right? Very functional, right? Doesn't mean I didn't have any problems, but and I remember having a conversation. So I had two supervisors because when I was getting my hours before I got licensed, um, I had to have supervisors. And I trained in one of the top pediatric therapeutic facilities, outpatient, in all of the East Coast. And I got an incredible education there and experience there. And I'm forever thankful for that. And I remember asking my DBT mentor, because DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, is typically um, historically been for people with personality disorders, and then also like bipolar and this and that. And I started working with a lot of girls that were labeled as came to me being labeled bipolar, or they're put on meds for that. And I'm like watching this pattern. And I'm just like, this is so interesting. And you guys, I'm not saying that this is everybody, okay, but I saw a pattern where these teenagers had very tumultuous home environments, and they were being labeled as bipolar, as like having a mood disorder, and put on meds. But the meds didn't make it better. And I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, there's this pattern, because I would work with their parents and I'd have to educate their parents and give their parents skills on how to acknowledge emotion and validate emotion and redirect constructively versus shaming and this. And so even girls who maybe didn't have that like huge catastrophic trauma like I was talking about, but clearly had experiences that were affecting them. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I did not have bipolar disorder. And I went to my mentor because I knew she would tell me her true thoughts. And I told her, I said, I was diagnosed with that. I'm like, and I have really wrestled with that my whole life because I don't feel like that was correct. I said, I really don't feel like I had bipolar disorder. And she said something to me that set me free. She's like, Andrea, sometimes something that looks like a diagnosis or whatever the person thinks it is at first glance is just somebody responding to their environment. And when they're not in that environment anymore, they don't respond that way anymore. Or it works out of them over time. She's like, based on what you're telling me, it sounds like you were just responding to your environment. She's like, the way that you are, the practitioner that you are, the grounded person that you are, how you participate in life, the way you emote in a healthy way. She's like, I see zero signs of bipolar. She's like, you're not on medication. I see zero signs of bipolar disorder. And that just gave me so much relief, because not because I thought I had bipolar disorder, because I walked around feeling gaslit for like almost a decade and a half of my life. I felt gaslit, you guys. And I'm sharing this with you because we walk around in a society that just throws labels all over the place. And practitioners just say labels, and they open up the freaking DSM and they just go off the check. Like, there's so much to the mental health field and the field of psychiatry that is so twisted and so misguided. And the things that are said in these appointments and the actions that are taken with people's lives and their treatment profoundly affect them. Sometimes the rest of their life, if they aren't as blessed as I was to have the different experiences I had to help me undo some of the damage that was done from those things. And I'm so thankful for that mentor. In fact, I might write her a letter. I'm so thankful for that mentor for saying that to me. And it just, a weight was lifted and I just felt freer, and it was healing. It was healing for her to say that to me. So I did a lot of really good work in my 13 years of practicing. And there were different moments throughout those 13 years where I felt these like gut feelings where I'm just like, what I'm doing isn't helping as much as I think it is. I always disagreed with how psychiatry was done, especially in nonprofits. Um, in nonprofits, typically psychiatry, like, or at least having an appointment with a psychiatrist is expected. Not every single nonprofit, but a lot of times anybody having any kind of financial assistance or like insurance assistance from the state typically is expected. If they're going to get therapy, they need to see a psychiatrist. I did not agree with that, because think about all the people who don't need medication, but they end up going in and somehow they leave on medication just by the fact that they had the appointment in the first place, right? And so there's not that many prescribers that are like not into prescribing. That's the whole point. And so that was really hard for me. And it was also hard for me to see lack of resources. it really took a toll on me and how I felt about the system when insurance wouldn't pay for things that actually would help people heal. Um, I'd have all these ideas and all these recommendations of therapeutic things that families could do for their kids or for their family, and insurance would never pay for any of it. And it was like talk therapy, and then there were like a couple of other modalities that were covered. And truly, talk therapy only takes you so far. I am a retired talk therapist, technically. I mean, I had DBT, but that's still, there's talking as a part of that. It's skill based and it's talking. And I don't believe in talk therapy beyond like the stage of once you come into awareness, you now need some sort of therapy that's going to do subconscious reprogramming, nervous system reprogramming, releasing of trapped trauma, releasing of these types of things from your body, from your subconscious. And none of that is covered by insurance. It is a huge problem. The other piece that was really starting to be taxing on me was that I had all this knowledge about nutrition, about supplementation, about minerals, about movement, about sunlight. And some of it I couldn't share technically because if somebody ever went and say like grabbed a supplement based on something I said, and maybe they had a reaction to it. And that can be many things, you guys. Like maybe they don't get a good supplement. Maybe they didn't consult their, maybe they have, whatever it is, right? Supplements aren't inherently bad. We just need to be educated in using them, right? But if I were to have recommended one and somebody would have had an issue, I could be sued. I could lose my license. The licensing board was so strict about, even if you had certifications, even if you had CEUs, even if you had education. And I hated it because there was so much that I knew that I couldn't tell my clients to help them heal. And I just got to a point where enough was enough. And so there was this convergence in my own personal life and in my career where it was just the perfect time. So I was starting to get feeling more and more like out of alignment with traditional mental health practices. I also was at the time starting to feel burnt out by the situation. It was during the pandemic. And I was on my screen all the time. And so it was like the perfect storm for me to decide to step back. And I kept my license for, I think, another 2 years, but didn't practice. And then the more I started to want to share openly about my own healing journey, and my healing journey doesn't stop there, you guys. I got diagnosed with Epstein-Barr virus, and I was in a perpetual flare-up for 3 years. I went through a very traumatic divorce. And so I dealt with some circumstantial mental health stuff. I had a child who went through that divorce with me as a toddler, so she dealt with some circumstantial mental health stuff. So I was already going through this second round of a healing journey and a wellness journey, and I was doing everything alternative medicine. And it was once I found the right things, like it was working, and I couldn't share any of that. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And so between my own personal preferences and my professional convictions, I decided to let go of my license so that I could raise hell, that I could say whatever I want, I could share whatever I want, just carte blanche, and not be scared that I was going to get called before the licensing body or get sued or anything. And I've been doing that ever since. I've been doing that for, gosh, it's like, I don't know, 3 or 4 years now. And I will tell you, it didn't start out with me being so bold. Like, I had to kind of deprogram myself as a therapist to feel like I could speak freely, to feel not scared to speak, to feel I was very much, I don't want to say brainwashed, but kind of like I had a lens that I was kind of brainwashed to think from in a certain way about diplomacy and this, and you have to watch what you say, and blah, blah, blah. And I had to undo that. So I've been spending the last several years undoing that. And I'm at the point where zero F's given, you guys. Like, I am here to educate. I am here to set people free. I am here to interview people who have profound knowledge that they can share with others that will set them free. I want to interview people with amazing testimonies. I want to talk about the hard things. I want to talk about the things that people label as conspiracy theories that aren't conspiracy theories, that are really happening in our medical and our mental health system and with big pharma. And it's going to be cray-cray, you guys, and it's going to be amazing. And I hope that you are willing to take this ride with me on this journey, on this podcast journey. I hope that you will share this message if you feel compelled. I hope you will give reviews, because I am just so passionate about getting the message out. I want to help people set themselves and their families free. There is so much that somebody can do before they ever have to see a psychiatrist that they can do to heal themselves. I say that with 100% confidence. I have healed myself. Well, God and I have healed me, but I have healed myself through alternative medicine, through holistic solutions, through getting to the root of things in my physical and the trauma and all of that. I have healed, right? And I'm still healing. And so that's what we're here to share. That's what I'm here to share. So I hope you will join me on this journey. If my story resonated with you, please share it, right? If there's a friend who needs to hear it, who needs hope, share it. You can be somebody who comes from a dark past, who comes from being labeled, who comes from being told things are hopeless, who comes from being told you'll always have to be on this med or whatever it is, to being somebody full of life and health and vibrance and living life on their terms and joy and thriving and success, if that's what you want. You can have those things. And you can also, if you're already that person, but you're holding on to a past that still hurts you, you can heal that, right? So you can step into that next level of true joy, true fulfillment, true embodiment of who you were always meant to be. And so I really hope that this podcast helps somebody today. Please share it. Please give a review. I am so ecstatic about this mission. And thank you all for listening to me today.